Good morning, everybody. Hi, good morning. Good morning. On behalf of the Wentworth Watershed Association Board of Directors, our membership, our partner organizations, our underwriters and sponsors, we welcome you to our 5th annual Water Summit. Your presence today shows your commitment to protecting surface waters in Wolfboro and beyond. Thank you for taking this beautiful morning to be with us. Today we'll learn all about the watershed management planning and how it informs the actions that need to be taken to protect the lakes and lands that we love. You will hear about planning that is taking place in each sub-watershed and actions that are being taken in the community to address larger scale projects to mitigate known issues on public, town land, and private land. You will also learn about actions you can take on your personal property to become more lake-minded by infiltrating stormwater, maintaining your septic systems, better maintaining your dirt driveway or camp road, and so much more. During the break, you'll have the opportunity to meet each other, visit local lake association tables, get resources, sign up for property visits, volunteer, and join a road agent forum to discuss camp road maintenance issues and solutions that you learned about at last year's summit. After the break, you will hear from representatives from each association who will update you on their stormwater management actions, about water quality in the lake they represent, cyanobacteria updates, and learn about how you can help. You will also have an opportunity to ask all of our presenters questions. There are question cards at the 2 desks to passing questions that our moderator will use. Thank you for being here. We're thrilled you are spending a morning with us and are interested in lake health. I now pass you over to our friend and moderator, Don Kretschmer.
Thanks, Julie. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming out and escaping the black flies for a few minutes, but rest assured they'll be waiting for you when we get done with this today. It's hard to believe that this is year number 5, or the fifth Water Summit. Oh, I better not set that on there. We've gone through a bunch of iterations of this Water Summit and tried to give you sort of progressively more and more detailed information. We started off with kind of the first Water Summit was general water quality issues, and we talked a little bit about climate change and how that might be affecting our water quality. We went into kind of watershed solutions in the second Water Summit. Then we talked about cyanobacteria, which is a really important issue, and it remains an important issue in the third summit. The fourth summit, we talked about some statewide initiatives, and now we're trying to pull it all together with sort of the watershed planning. And this comes at a good time because there's some fairly extensive watershed planning activities going on right now in the watershed, and I think our first speaker will talk a little bit more about that. And we're also going to kind of tease off a workshop that's coming up, kind of a shallow dive into septic systems. The deeper dive into your septic system will come in June, if you're interested in that, but I think we should all be interested, as many of us are on septic systems around our lakes and water resources. A couple of housekeeping things. We have tables around the outside. Please visit them during the breaks. Cell phones, if you could take a moment to silence them or turn them off. If they happen to go off during the presentation, you will be recognized, and I may have you stand up and take a bow. So I'm going to move right on to the first speaker, and the first speaker is Forrest Bell. Forrest runs a consulting company. I have a bio here that was in the program, and I know Forrest well enough that I don't think I need to read it. Forrest runs a consulting company that does natural resource consulting and works on lake and watershed plans throughout New England. I've had the good pleasure of working with him for more than 20 years now, and found that he and his staff are always really well well prepared, really sharp people, and really down to earth in terms of the way that they're able to bring the message home to local watershed communities. He's going to talk to you a little bit about what's going on in Wolfboro in terms of watershed planning, and in general, how watershed planning kind of pulls all the pieces together. And with that, I'll turn it over to Forrest.
All right, thank you, Don. Can everybody hear me okay? I have a pretty loud voice anyways, but I want to be sure I can follow the slides and also talk to you today. So, welcome everybody. Thanks for having me. I actually haven't been to Wolfboro in a few years. Shame on me, but it's great to be back, and it's an awful day out today, so... But I will probably go outside afterwards anyways and enjoy. But lucky all of you to live or work here in Wolfboro. You know, this drone shot really captures, you know, the idyllic village, you know, by the lake, on the lake. So I understand why lakes and watersheds are so important to all of you. Just a few things about me. My background is similar to Don's. You know, water resources is my background. I've been doing watershed planning work for about 30 years now, so that's been the main focus personally. Our company is a 16-person firm. We have an office in Dover and one in Portland, Maine. And I like to say that we work where science meets civics. So it's always been my feeling that there's a gap between sound science and good policy. So really, almost all the work we do falls in that gap. So we do scientific assessments, but it's equally as important as doing those sound assessments to bring that to folks like yourselves, to communities, to municipal staff, to the state of New Hampshire, and explain things in such a way that you can understand it and make good policy. So that's really been the thrust of my career so far. We've been able to work all the green highlights here. Those are all watersheds that we've worked in New England. We've been very focused in New England. And this is not to be boastful, it's really to show that we have a breadth of experience looking at all sorts of, you know, lakes, rivers, streams, estuaries, and comparing and contrasting in a lot of cases what's happening in these watersheds. And there's a lot of similarities, but absolutely every water body we work with is somewhat unique. And I mentioned watershed plans. I know it's kind of hard to read from where you're sitting, but these are all watershed plans within this region that we've worked on. So a lot of familiarity with this wonderful region. And yeah, so speaking of watersheds, I know this is pretty basic for all of you, but sometimes it's good to take a step back and just remind ourselves of, you know, why we're doing what we're doing. And You've probably heard this before, we all live in a watershed, but that's really important, right? Every single one of us are in an area where when it rains or when the snow melts from the mountains, it goes to a receiving water body, whether that's a lake or a stream or the Atlantic Ocean. And it's really what happens on this land is incredibly important. And the decisions that we make, whether they're policy decisions or an individual homeowner decision, is really, really critical to the health of these waters. So I always like to remind people, you know, I like people, but I really like animals, and I think back to, you know, 500 years ago, right? So this is probably, it looks something like this, right? In this picture, you had the loons and the trout and the bald eagle, and it was a forested area. And it's important to remember that because we love our lakes, but sometimes we love them too much. And I'm guessing that everybody in this room knows that and understands that. But that's really what our jobs are, is to, try to live as softly on the land as we all possibly can, and then help each other to make good decisions. And, of course, we want to farm the lands and we want to build our homes on shorefronts, but there's a bit of a price to that. And the more we understand that and we understand what those costs are, the more we can do things to make things better. We can make decisions. So you've all probably heard a lot about phosphorus, right? Phosphorus is the limiting nutrient in lakes. And this is one of my favorite slides. I'm sure Don has used this dozens of times as well. I think this is an experimental lake in Canada. I think this was done in the late 60s or early 70s, where they did not inject phosphorus onto this side, and there's a curtain here, and they did inject phosphorus onto that side. So you can visually see it, and that's very powerful, right? When you can see a change in water quality, because a lot of things that happen in water quality you don't see, right? It's happening until Don or Julie or someone takes a water sample and takes a test. We don't really know what's happening. So again, back to that picture of what the land looked like roughly before it was developed. Roughly speaking, there's about 10 times more phosphorus that runs off the land into the receiving water bodies, and we'll talk specifically about lakes today. So we have to really consider that, and also those of you that are in the land protection business or are volunteers, what a great bang for the buck to protect land. That's something I learned 2 decades ago, is land protection and keeping some of the land forever wild is really important. So, what about phosphorus? And what a lot of people still don't know, and this is such an important concept, and for you to know, for your kids to know, for your grandkids to know, is that your soil here in New Hampshire has a fairly high level of phosphorus naturally within it. So when you see these eroded gullies, eroded areas around culverts, 5 miles from your lake, that sediment is phosphorus is attaching to that sediment and making its way down to your lake. So again, an important concept, and by volume, it's sediment that's the greatest pollutant in our lakes. So we have to remember that, and we've had these slides. I should have brought one of how many dump trucks of sediment equals how much phosphorus, but those are the concepts we have to think about. And I have another slide where I'll go into more detail. So there are lots of other inputs as well. It's not just eroded ditches and eroded roads, but we have those Canada geese, right? We love them and we hate them. I have a camp on a lake in Harrison, Maine, not far from here, and that's a big problem. So happy to talk with you at the break about how to take care of geese. And septic systems, Gary's going to talk more about, so I won't go too far into that, but there are issues. So lots of different issues. And I know Don mentioned in your summit a couple of years ago, you really focused on cyanobacteria, but this is a big deal. And I think it was maybe a dozen years ago, I saw a presentation by Dr. Jim Haney at the University of New Hampshire talking about the link between cyanobacteria and ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. How many people here have known someone that has had ALS? I'm just curious. Yeah, so about half. So I lost a good friend to that, and it's obviously a really scary and debilitating disease. And so between Dr. Haney, and there's also a professor in Dartmouth, Sommer, I forget his last name, Elijah is his first name. So you have 2 professors that are still studying cyanobacteria and their effects on human health on a daily basis, and that research is really, really, really important. But I think we're going to keep learning more and more about cyanobacteria, and because it impacts human health, there is more of that, the lakes on fire type situation. And I urge you to, go online and Google, some of these research studies that have been done to try to learn more about it. It's fascinating, and again, super important. Okay, so I'll bring it down to the local level a little bit. We all live in a watershed, and maybe we put together these slides. Maybe you haven't seen this before. So here's your town of Wolfboro, and then this is the Lake Wentworth watershed here. So as you can see, it takes up, I think, about 80% of the town. So it's a tremendous size of an area. Lake Wentworth flows into Crescent Lake. You have Sergeant's Pond that flows into Lake Wentworth, and they all flow into Wolfboro Bay, as does Russ Pond. So, it's again, something a normal person that hasn't learned a little bit about this wouldn't understand, that these waters are flowing, these waters are moving constantly. And when we have these storms like we had 2 weeks ago, where we see 4 or 5 inches of rain, you can see it happening, and probably a lot of you did. We also have Mirror Lake and Winter Harbor over here. You have a little piece of Wolfboro here of your town that flows into Moltenboro Bay. And as I mentioned, everything here is flowing into Lake Winnie. And then you have these other watersheds as well that make up part of your town. So we all live in a watershed. So everyone that's here from Wolfboro. So I mentioned Ossipee Lake. The northeast and northwest corners of Wolfboro flow into Ossipee Lake, which is a huge watershed to the north and to the east. And then you even have a little piece of your town that flows into the Piscataqua and Salmon Falls River, and then into the Piscataqua. So it's a pretty complex system. And then if you zoom out a little bit, it's always important to do. And I thought about even zooming out further to see the impact to the Gulf of Maine and the Atlantic Ocean. But I think this is pretty good. Here's your town. This is the Lake Winnie watershed, and here are some of these other big watersheds. So again, this is just conceptual information to try to give you some context on watersheds and what they mean. Speaking of Lake Winnipesaukee, it's a little hard to see, but it's right here, and the Lake Winnipesaukee Association and partners and stakeholders have been working to develop watershed plans all around the lake. These are done, and then Wolfboro Bay, as many of you may know, is just starting here. So that's a watershed plan that's underway, and there are a few more that are remaining, but I know Pat Tarpey, who's here, and her organization are working towards completing those. So that'll be really nice to see once you have watershed plans all around the lake. And I'll tell you more about what a plan is in a second. So watershed plans, you have the Mirror Lake watershed plan, and then the one that we helped develop in 2012. So these were both done in 2012. Time for an update, and that's in the works. The Ossipee Lake watershed up here, we had 2. Moltenboro Bay and Winter Harbor was, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. And then I already mentioned the updates for these plans. So I'll slow down a little bit and just tell you a little bit about what a plan is and why it's so important. So if someone said, Forrest, what's the one thing that's really important in a watershed plan? I'd say, well, there's not just one thing, there's many, but it's really this action plan. If I had to pick and you forced me to it, it is an action plan. It is what do you need to do to clean up your water body, who's going to do it, how much is it going to cost, right? The where, what, when, how, why. But anyways, the process is basically this: building public support. Then this is what I call the boots on the ground. So getting out in the field, out on the lake, and really, inventorying the watershed. We spend a lot of time doing this, defining the problems after you've been, done the boots on the ground work. Then you build a model, basically. And the models aren't perfect, but they're pretty darn good. And the better data that you have to go into the model, the better the output's going to be. So Don has done a lot of this modeling in his career, and I think he'd agree that we're getting better and better each time we do this, and we're learning more, and that we have better data. We have better water quality data that are going into these models, better data about the land. So things are going well. And then holding a public workshop to understand all of this is a big part of a watershed plan, and then setting a goal. So you actually set a numeric goal. You have to. The Clean Water Act requires this of we want our lake at X parts per billion, and here's how we're going to get there. So that, again, is sort of the big, end story of a watershed plan. Then you write the plan, and then you apply for grants, you implement, and very happy to see how much you guys have done here in Wolfboro, especially for Lake Wentworth. I have a few slides on that as well. And then it really is a cycle, right? This is not just to keep consultants busy. This is because about every 10 years, things change a lot on the landscape. The data become outdated. So it's important that a plan is a living, breathing plan. So again, this is kind of another slide showing some of the same things, so I'll go through it kind of quickly. I hate to use acronyms, but BMPs, Best Management Practice, it's a good one, and those are really important. Those are not only just your on-the-ground fixes, like putting a rain garden in, but it's also a new ordinance could be a best management practice, and they can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, or they can cost almost nothing. So there's quite a range there, and that's part of what you do in a plan is what BMPs can you do to fix your lake, to fix your watershed. So I mentioned the action plan and federal grant funding. My goodness, if I was giving this speech 10 years ago, I'd be sort of scratching my head of, okay, we have a nice plan, everyone's working hard, but there's not much money out there to fix anything. Right now, as I stand here, there's more federal money that's going down trickling down to the states and the municipal level and the nonprofit level to do a lot of these fixes that we're recommending doing. So the infrastructure bill, the ARPA, those monies are out there, and it's really nice to know that if it's going to cost $3 million to treat some of the phosphorus in your watershed and make the lake healthier, that money's actually out there. So I bring you good news along those lines. So again, identifying the problem, what is the target, where do we want to be? So that's actually, believe it or not, the model will recommend something, but they're actually community decisions. So when the Lake Wentworth plan is revised, there'll be an opportunity to weigh in and say, well, we want to be aggressive. We want to be more proactive and set a higher goal. That's actually done at the community level, and usually the state and the EPA who funds these plans will listen to what the local folks have to say. So that's nice to see. So I mentioned BMPs. I don't know how well you can see these, but these are examples. So the watershed plan for Lake Wentworth was written in 2012, and all these best management practices, these on-the-ground fixes, and these are darn good ones, by the way. I've been to all these sites. Julie sent me these slides, and I hadn't seen them before, and it's just such a nice feeling when you do the boots on the ground and you see state landings. And I walked right here on this camp, and our job is to identify it and give a concept, but the engineers, CEI that they've worked with, I think on all of these, did a really nice job. So you're treating a lot of phosphorus at these locations, and that is so good to see. Okay, so for my last 10 minutes or so that I have, I wanted to talk a little bit about lessons learned. So I mentioned I've been doing this for 3 decades. I promised myself when I started that I'd be a lifelong learner. And some of these, again, these are fairly intuitive, but I want to emphasize them because I've just seen these things work. and local leadership. So here you are, you're all local leaders. You're here at this summit today. I bet most of you do something to help the watershed. But having local champions like the Wentworth Watershed Association, the Lake Winnie Association, the town, the lake associations that you're involved with are obviously key. But it's also really good to have those local champions. And when I think of successful projects over the years, and again, Wolfboro is a great example, I also think of Fred Quimby, who worked with us on Merrymeeting River and Merrymeeting Lake, and Don helped on that project as well. And he's a retired professor from Cornell that lives in New Durham, and he is like driving the process. And it's so important to have someone that's driving it. And I'll also mention with this local leadership, what's really important is we need the younger generations to get involved. And obviously, lake associations, pond associations, I noticed the population, the people, the board members are often, older. And the more we can get the younger generation involved and really pass the torch to the next generation to help take care of these lakes. So when you're at your board meetings and you're doing your strategic planning, really think about that. And I know they're busy and they have kids and jobs and all these things, but it's so important. And again, we're starting to see more and more where we do have younger people getting involved in these efforts, on the staff level, but also on the board level. Communication. Again, outreach and communication is fairly standard. Every watershed project, most lakes have something that they do, but keeping that message clear and concise and simple is really important. And there are some examples here of the Wentworth Watershed Association and Lake Winnie. I just love the Keep Winnie Blue slogan. It's catchy, it's basic, and something clicks in your mind when you think about that. And it's not about convincing me or you, it's about the people, maybe the seasonal people, or the people that visit, or the people that are looking to buy a house in the area, that they buy into this and understand what it means as early as possible. So again, this is a little hard to see in the light, but source impacts. Okay, so that, I mentioned the boots on the ground work that we do. I'll never forget, I think it was 2008, I was at a select board meeting in Wakefield, New Hampshire, so not far from here. And I can't repeat the language he used, which was kind of, he was swearing, the select board member, and it was on TV, so that wasn't great. But he said, "You can't blankety blank tell me that this ditch on this stream is going to make it 2 miles down into Great East Lake." He said, "You can't tell me that." And I just remember looking at him and I said, "Yes, sir, I can tell you that. We know that. We measure it." And next time you go out in one of these thunderstorms that come through in August, take a look at how fast that water and sediment is moving. And then I said, go take a look. And in 2008 we didn't have as good, Google Earth wasn't as good back then, but it sure is now. And you can see these plumes, these sediment plumes, these alluvial fans that are happening in your lake, and probably the lake you live on, you might have a couple of streams that flow into the lake where you can see that. Well, that's that sediment by volume that's making it in there, and it does get transported downstream pretty quickly. So let people know that. Source impacts, so septic systems, I don't want to steal Gary's thunder, but what we find, septics are probably the hardest to pinpoint of all the sources that we work with. And why? Because you can't really see it. And it's even hard to measure in a lot of cases, once it gets into the water. We've tried tracking, right in the water with, conductivity meters, just where under the water near where septic systems would discharge into the lake, and it's so diluted by then it's really hard to do. So it's really about education and understanding and working with site evaluators and making good decisions around septic. And probably the most involved septic system process I was ever involved with was here at Lake Wentworth, where we went door to door with the committee to 650 properties. So some of you might have met me when I came by, or Rich Massey or Jack O'Connell or whoever was with us. And it was really interesting to talk to people about their septic systems. Maybe that doesn't sound interesting, but some people knew a lot. Some people didn't know where their system was. So there's really quite a broad range. So it became as much as a survey to identify, the age of systems. It became an educational process. And when you're face to face for 10 or 15 minutes with 650 landowners, although I should say, I think our success rate was 54%. So we really only talked to 300 and something, but that's still pretty darn good. So if you can put the time and effort into something like that, I would say it's time well spent. And I've really already touched on this, but this is cyanobacteria. When I started this work 3 decades ago, I'll never forget, I was out at a pond in Maine called Weber Pond. It was Labor Day weekend, and you could hear a pin drop. There was nobody on the lake because the lake was a pea soup green. You could not swim in it. You could not fish in it. It didn't smell particularly good. It was definitely an eyesore. So everyone was gone. It was Labor Day weekend, and there were very, very few people there. So the research, research is amazing, right? It's always happening, and it's, again, with all the funding that's out there, it seems to be ramping up some now. But we really need to keep learning more, learn about cyanobacteria, learn about these impacts from climate change and the warming waters and how that's making a difference, and then share that story. Share it with your neighbors, share it with your kids and grandkids, and make sure that gets out there. So that's so very important. I already talked about the funding, but here it is. It's important at the local level to shake and rattle with the state of New Hampshire. You have a state that, in my opinion, is very proactive when it comes to lakes and cyanobacteria. I think there are 600 or 700 lakes in New Hampshire, and I feel like they're getting a lot of attention, but it's a state, and they have limited resources, limited people power, so they need all of your help. And they also need help spending their money. So, make sure you ask them about that, because it tends to bottleneck, right? These funding sources tend to bottleneck at the federal level and the state level before they make it down here to the local level. And then I'll just finish with, so you're sitting here and you're saying, okay, this is good. It's all kind of, a lot of big picture stuff. What can I do? What can I do to make a difference? And that's also so important. So you've heard the term before, death by 1,000 cuts, or I like to say death by 1,000 paper cuts. And that's often what happens. And it's very common for a lakeshore landowner to say, well, what's going to make a difference if I plant a few high bush blueberries here? Well, it will, because if you do it and then 500 other landowners do it, and you've taken care of 500 of these 1,000 sites, you're gonna see a difference. You're gonna see a difference in the water quality. You're gonna have less runoff that's making it into your lake. So it does make a difference. So educating yourself, there's lots of resources out there. And the thing I love about these shorefront best management practices is that they look good. So you can fix the darn erosion on your property and the stuff that's coming off your rooftop, and you could put it in this rain garden or make these nice steps and pathways, and your property looks better. So I think that's really important, is that as we do this work, have your nice flowers, have your nice perennials that really make everything look good. So it's really about infiltration, right? So we want to get the water into the, we want to divert it, right? When we look at our steep hill and our steep driveway, and darn it, there's no place to put the water without ticking off my landowner over here. So if you can't divert it, then you want to infiltrate it, and then you also want to slow it down. And these plants and these rocks that you see, that's basically what they're doing. They're slowing it down. They're giving everything a chance to soak into your soil, where you have natural treatment that happens. So I love this picture. Again, I have a shorefront property. There's a big lawn there. I didn't do that. It's been there. It's part of multiple cottages. But I should be living in a place like this where you have, the wild vegetation and there's no lawn to take care of. And I think this still looks nice. And look, you still have a view. I mean, I get it. Lake views are important. Every one of us wants it. So there are ways to give back to nature a little bit and still get what we want. So again, a lot of resources available to landowner. I don't know if this presentation will be posted somewhere. Yeah, okay, so good. So, but there's the Lake-Minded program for the Wentworth Watershed Association, the Winnie Lake Blue program, New Hampshire Lakes has programs, UNH Extension, Landscaping at the Water's Edge, New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, Soak Up the Rain. There's really nice fact sheets that are out there that if you're a visual person like me, you can see what's there, and then having your septic system inspected, because again, something could be happening down there underneath the ground that you're just not aware of. And again, Gary will touch on that. And participate in projects and grants, get involved. They will love to have you and have your help. So with that, I'll thank you, and I know there'll be a chance for questions later. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Forrest. So the way we're going to handle questions is, as we've done in the past, I believe there's some note cards, and you can pass the questions forward or do it at the break. And right after the break, we're going to have Forrest and Gary both come back up, and we'll go through some questions. We may have a little bit of time before the break. I'm not positive of that. But Susan Goodwin has the cards there if anybody needs one. And okay. Yeah, and I'm sure Forrest answered all the questions. That was a very good presentation, and thanks to him. So next up is our little dive into septic systems with Gary Spalding. He's the principal in advanced on-site solutions, and Gary specializes in high-strength wastewater projects and the permitting of waterfront properties in New Hampshire. He researches, develops, and tests innovative wastewater treatment systems for the residential and commercial applications. And so Gary is going to tell us a little bit about the workshop that he's going to do in June on septic systems. And I think it's especially important for our local lakes here and our local water resources. We have a lot of lots that are, sort of non-conforming lots or small or very difficult sites. And the challenges of dealing with septic in those sites is not small. So with that, I'll turn it over to Gary.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me? Great. Gary Spalding. Some of you have heard me before, I'm sure. We got about 15 minutes or less to get through septic systems, so not a lot of time. So we're going to just go through a few things. Septic system, we're going to do a workshop on June 14th between 9 and 12 and talk for 3 hours or more on septic systems and try to fill you in on all the things that you may have questions for and some things that you may not even realize were important. Failed septic systems, one of the questions I get, how can I tell if my septic system is going to fail or when it's going to fail? There's no real answer other than they usually fail on Labor Day, 4th of July weekend, whenever you've got the party going on. Christmas, Thanksgiving, those are when it's going to fail. So some of the topics that we're going to discuss on the 14th, which have come up over the times, a number of different times I've done those presentations, so the top one, there's a lot of important dates in New Hampshire regulations and in the RSAs, which give property owners your rights to do certain things based on when your property was developed. And we're going to go over the importance of that in the records. The other one, can my seasonal cottage be converted to a full-time use? The answer is yes, but there's a process that you have to go through to do it. Septic tank additives, is it good or bad? We hear a lot of time, my pumper or my grandfather, somebody said I should be putting yeast or Rid-X or something down the drain. There's a lot of studies that show it's not beneficial and don't use it. And I've said there's every time I talk about septic system additives, I will give you my bank account number. You send me the money if you want to spend the money, but don't put it in your septic system. It does no good for you. What type of septic systems for waterfront property? There is no one septic system. If someone comes out to your property and says, you need to use this style system, you need to ask what else is available. When I first started in this industry, we had two options. We had stone and pipe, and it was either going to be in beds, trenches, dry well, or chambers. Now there's somewhere around 15 plus different technologies in New Hampshire for septic systems. So every lot, there's a septic system that works best on your lot. It's not one size fits all. Conventional versus alternative. Conventional, everything happens in a primary septic tank, goes into a leach field, and that's your aerobic treatment system. With an alternative system, a lot of the treatment will happen inside the tank, and then it releases treated effluent out into the soil. By treating it in the tank and releasing it, you can get a reduction in leach field size, better water quality, so there's some benefits to it. How large does the field need to be? What I tell everybody is design the leach field how you intend to use the septic system. So we've worked with property owners who have that 2-bedroom house that's 10,000 square feet. That's probably not a 2-bedroom house, so design it how you intend to use it. The other thing that we've all seen happening in the last few years, because property taxes keep going up and up, is a lot of the seasonal properties are now being rented out for a longer period of time as Airbnb, vacation rentals. So it's important if you're doing that, and that's the intent of it, if you have to replace your septic system, design it how you intend to use it. If it's going to be a rental property, it's going to get a higher impact, more water use, and more demand on the system than if it was just a family cottage. Maintenance on a septic system, I can give you the standard answers, the book answers. It protects the groundwater, it saves you money. Leach fields, you don't have to replace it. For $500 to pump up your tank every 2 years, it's good insurance. But I think as I thought about this more and more, especially for today, I'm trying to think, what's the most important reason for maintaining septic systems for waterfront property owners? And I've come to, in my head anyways, as I thought it through, I'm thinking regulations. I look as the waterfront property owners as the low-hanging fruit for regulations. I can make stricter regulations and target the waterfront property owner. But as we know from Don's talk, it's a watershed issue. It's upstream. When someone is upstream and they build a new subdivision, it's not on the water, they put in drainage swales, more houses, all that comes down, washes into the lake. But if you don't maintain your septic systems and the algae blooms happen on your lake, what's the cause of that algae bloom? You, not the person upstream, not the person 10 miles away. Everyone points to the waterfront property owner. So maintenance, I think, is important for you to help slow down the regulations related to waterfront property and make it so it's a fairer comparison. As I got into this in '86, the regulations for waterfront property owners have become more strict since '86 when I started working in New Hampshire. The regulations for the watershed away from it have not, the regulations have not improved or have increased as fast for the upstream people than you folks. And I use the example all the time of, I've got a road, waterfront owner on the water, directly across the street is homeowners, but they're not on the waterfront because you and the street are between us. And the people on the waterfront in a lot of towns have to submit records for pumping and show inspections on the leach field, but the person 200 feet on the opposite side of the road that doesn't have the same restrictions, they've got just as much impact across the road, in my opinion, as you do on the lake. So maintenance, I think the most important thing I think to take away from maintenance now in this regulatory cycle that we're in is to protect your water property, your rights for the property, so that it pushes regulatories to think outside the box upstream away from the lake. How often do I need to have it pumped? Typically every 2 years is what we recommend people, but if you have an Airbnb and you're renting it, it's going to be more often. The other reason for maintenance and pumping and how often would be how old is your septic system? How big is the tank? If it's a modern system, maybe you can get away with it a little bit farther, longer. If it's a older, built in the 60s, 70s, more often. So there's a lot of factors on pumping and when. It comes down to use, age of the system, size of the tanks, those type of things. And then on the last one, alternative septic systems, do they require more maintenance? The answer is no. They do require more inspections, which I think is a positive thing for everybody on lakes or in the watershed. Being forced to make sure your septic system is working accordingly, I think is extremely important for everybody. Some of the questions that we typically get at these talks that we'll go through then, can the state make me abandon my cottage if I have a failed septic system? The answer is no. That's the simple answer. The long answer we'll talk about on the 14th on what you need to do and things that may happen, but the state is not going to make anyone move them out of their house because they have a failed septic system. Aesthetics is an important consideration for a lot of waterfront property owners because your lots are so small. You're talking, 10,000 square feet, sometimes even less. So aesthetics is important for a lot of people. We'll go through that. The cost of installing a new septic system. It used to be everyone always threw out a number, $10,000, $12,000 to put in a septic system. Lakefront property and island property, we are seeing septic systems in the $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 range. So it's even more important to know the type of system you're putting in, how long it's going to last, the maintenance on it, because of the cost to replace everything. Large amount, usable area, no candy cane vents in the yard. Can I park on my system? Why is my system larger than my neighbor's system? And how long will it last? So these are all things that we get asked and we'll go over with on the 14th. So if we think about it, in the Northeast, 50% of all of our population is on-site wastewater. And this is an older consensus. I would think that in the last few years where we've seen such a big influx of people coming to the Northeast, especially with the pandemic, more development going on over the years, this is going to be well above 50%. So if you think 50% of everybody around us have an on-site septic system, and we need to make sure they're maintained for the health and safety of all of us, not just for that particular property owner. Because I think a lot of us think about my septic system is important to me. We don't consider what happens to our neighbor or down the slope. Also, we've seen it, we've been on sites where someone has a failed septic system and they don't think of any problem that's running over the edge, across the lawn, down into their neighbor's property, into the watershed. They think it's an inconvenience for them. They don't realize the impact it has throughout for all of us. Especially when you consider 1% of the groundwater that we have available to us is drinking water quality. The rest of it we have to treat, and the cost to treat drinking water for municipalities or buy bottled water, we know what that is. It's expensive. So by maintaining septic system, think of it, we're maintaining and trying to keep that 1% that we can still use it in the future from contaminants. So one of the questions we get for a lot of people up top here, you'll see 4, 3, 2-bedroom homes. This is the gallons per day that New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services says you use in your house. So if you have a 4-bedroom house, you're using 600 gallons a day. A 3-bedroom house, 450. 2-bedroom, 300. I will tell you that these are peak factors. So that's going to be like a weekend when you're home and the family is there or you're doing a lot of wash. A lot of these times, these numbers are going to be 50% of that, the actual daily use. If you have bunkhouses or sleeping in a bunkhouse, or you put in or in a garage or above the garage or something for family, they rate that at 60 gallons per day per person. An ADU is an alternative dwelling unit. It's an apartment, an in-law apartment, a parent's apartment, or a studio. So a one bedroom is 225 gallons a day. So keep that in mind, especially these numbers if you have an old outdated septic system that was put in the 60s or 70s, and you may only have a septic tank that is 750 or 1,000 gallon tank. If you have a 4-bedroom home and you're using, even half of that, 300 gallons a day, 300 gallons a day, and you have a 1,000 gallon septic tank or a 750 gallon septic tank, every day if you're putting 300 gallons into it and you don't maintain it and you haven't pumped it out for 5, 6, 7 years, your tank is full of solids in what we call short-circuiting. So when you dump or you flush the toilet, you are not getting aerobic treatment, anaerobic treatment in the tank. You're just pushing it straight through because the tank doesn't have the capacity to process the anaerobic activity. Water use, for all of us, toilets, bathroom, we're using 75% of the water that we use every day is in the bathroom. Prior to the pandemic, when everybody was going to work and we had less people working in the house environment, this number probably was considerably less then because everybody went to work. Family was gone, school. Now with the number of people who work out of their house, the number of people who now have home businesses, this number here is only going to increase because of the stay-at-home factor. Cooking, 5% of it goes. Laundry, 20%. So your bathroom waste is your number one thing, and if you think about where most of your contaminants come from, it's going to be coming from the bathroom. The other thing that you want to consider too with your on-site septic systems, and what we have seen over the years is an increase in fats, oils, grease going into a residential septic system, which seems odd. No one cooks with Crisco, everyone's cooking with oil, olive oil. Fat's not the issue, but oil and grease becomes a bigger issue. And we have found in the last 5 years, a really increase in oil and grease in the septic system. And some of it we believe is coming from cooking, but we think a lot of it is coming from the shower in the bathroom because of all of the designer soaps that are on the market now. We've got soaps with a lot of oils in it because it's better for our skin. We're buying soaps made from goats and animal. So that's increasing it in the septic system. If you're using that type of product, you may want to pump out the septic system more often. So 975 lakes and ponds in New Hampshire, 10,000 miles of rivers and streams have documented. That's not the drainage swales. That's not the little intermittent stream that only flows in the spring and the fall. That's just documented. So when you think about what Don talked about earlier, our watershed, we focus on the main streams, but we could have a subdivision upstream of our lakes, which only has an intermittent stream that goes through it certain times of the year, fall or spring. That has as much impact during the rainy season and snow melt as someone that's directly on a stream because it's getting into the watershed. So I do a lot of talks on septic systems. Like I said, I think the low-hanging fruit for regulations and regulatory is you folks that live on the water property, because I can point to each of you and say, update your septic system, and it's quick. And it's regulatory-wise, it makes everybody feel better. But we have to focus beyond that, I think. Upstream, people who don't live on it in order to protect our surface waters. And, this is the number. This is another older number, $1.8 billion comes to our state in revenue for recreational. A lot of times people understand money versus the environment. As sad as that is, money, if it hits them, if the lake gets polluted or it gets closed for a weekend, if I don't live on the lake, that's no big deal to me. So one thing to think of We talk about septic systems. This is our last slide. So a conventional, bring that back. I think my slide is screwed up. So for a 4-bedroom house, 600 gallons a day with a typical New Hampshire soil, 12-minute perk rate. Perk rate is how fast water can be absorbed into the ground. So depending upon your soil, if you had a class 1 well-drained soil, 2-minute perk rate, sands. You get up into a 12-minute, 15-minute glacial till, a little bit not as fast for infiltration into the ground. A lot of times, the slower the infiltration in the ground, the better treatment you get, because if you have a really coarse sand and you've got phosphorus, nitrates, bacteria that goes through it really rapid and quick, there isn't a lot of retention time to help break down the bacteria and treat the wastewater. So you can go to alternative systems, you can go with fabric-based, you can go with concrete-based systems and get a reduction. One of the products that we do is an aerobic treatment system, and a lot of the aerobic treatment systems on the market in New Hampshire right now will get a 75 to 90% reduction. So if you have a small waterfront property, think of that parking space outside that you park in. That's a 10 by 20 parking space, 200 square feet. There's technology available on the market that will allow you to put a leach field that size on your property. If you have the room for a conventional stone and pipe, we always recommend that you stay with stone and pipe. But there are availabilities, there is technology on the market for these small substandard lots. And these are all things that we're going to go over in detail on the 14th. So I'm hoping to see a lot of you there and others. And then when you come, if you want to, before the 14th, if you send something in to Julia, then we can have your questions and have answers for it. And if I have to research something in order to have that answer, that'll give me the time to do it. So that is my last slide, and I think we're on break. Don will tell you you're on break.
Well, thanks, Gary. I think right now we're going to hold on questions until after the break. We're going to have a break until, let's say, 10:30. And it's a chance for you to go out and visit all the tables. I think we got a lot of great information, but I'm quite sure that Gary and Forrest didn't answer all the questions. So feel free, write down questions, and we'll get to them right after the break and go from there. Thanks, folks. Hey folks, can we get back to our seats slowly or quickly? Hello? Hello folks, can we get back to our seats and we'll get going? Yeah, if Gary can come back up. There he is. Test. Okay, hopefully everybody got refreshments. I think I said this last year that the volunteers here don't want to take those refreshments home. So before you leave, load up.
Sit over here so I can see everybody.
Okay, so we're going to do a few questions for Forrest and Gary, and then we may have them come back up at the end. I think we will have them come back up at the end in case there's questions we don't quite get to. There are some questions that came in that we may not know the answers up here on the stage. What we'll do is post those questions and the answers on the Wentworth Watershed webpage afterwards. One in particular that just jumped out at both Forrest and I is on reverse osmosis for cyanobacteria, and we're going to have to find out the answer, the complete answer on that. Okay, I'm going to start off with a question for Gary. So at the recent rains and erosion in the watershed, what should we look for around our septic systems that are red flags?
I would look, especially this time of year, I would look for excessive growth over the septic system. You know, a section of it that is growing faster than the other. So if you have a leach field, if you have a leach field the size of this stage and you've got one corner with high lush grass on it in one area, then that's the part you should start looking at and seeing if there's an issue in that section. That's about the only thing you can do.
Okay, thanks Gary. I have a question for Forrest. This one will take a while. I'm just going to give you the first one. What are the top 5 causes to lake pollution?
The top 5 causes to lake pollution?
In no particular order, maybe.
All right, so you're going to get the Forrest Bell version of this, which may or may not be 100% correct, but I haven't done this for a while. The top 5 sources, so, and I'm going to be talking about New England, so I assume this is a local question. I would put roads up there as my number 1 culprit. A lot of our roads, especially our camp roads as we call them, our gravel roads, were built a long time ago. A lot of these roads were aimed directly at the lake. Maybe they end in a boat launch or something like that. So a lot of the roads that I've seen over the years are poorly maintained and really need a lot of work. So I would put roads number 1. Number 2, I would say is kind of that death by 1,000 cuts. It's sort of a little bit of everything, and I guess I'll narrow that down by saying vegetation and cutting down, trees for new development and taking that forested landscape and parceling, taking bits of that out, whether it's on the shoreline or away from the shoreline. Number 3, I would put septic systems up there, although I'll say that really tends to vary quite a bit, lake to lake, pond to pond, depending on the soil types, depending on how old the buildings are around the lake. And I got to come up with 2 more?
Well, you don't have to.
All right, I'll stick with those three. Usually, kind of jump out at the top for me. I guess I'll throw out number 4 is kind of you maybe don't have that here, is a big agricultural feedlot, or even whether it is there now or was there historically, because a lot of those nutrients can live in the sediment at the bottom of the lake and be resuspended as you lose oxygen levels. So whether it's an old agricultural field or maybe a big golf course that used a ton of phosphorus years ago, I would put that as number 4, the kind of variable ones.
Okay, great. Here's maybe a quick one for Gary. So considering regulations such as Title V, what age is considered a modern septic system?
By regulatory-wise, anything that was designed and installed after around 1972 is considered modern or conventional. Prior to 1972, we had in New Hampshire, there's regulations that if you are a waterfront property, you had to follow rules related to what they called then a cottage industry septic system. That went from right around to around 70, 72, and then that's when they started modern design or regulatory. So 72 and beyond are better systems than anything that was put in prior to that in the 60s.
Okay. So this one's for Forrest. And this is kind of an amalgam of a couple different ones. So there's a lot of BMPs and permeable surfaces that have been allowed, particularly in the shorefront area, and that's facilitated larger and larger houses because they put in these things. They're typically not maintained. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we were just having a conversation at the break, Don and I were, about that, and I guess in the issues that need to be addressed, I would say BMP maintenance is near or at the top of that, and I think it's a bit of a breakdown in process, to be honest. You know, a lot of the times, if it's under a grant, a landowner has to sign a 5-year maintenance agreement, and that's great, but I don't think I've seen a lot of grants where someone's following up and actually making sure that the landowner is doing the work in 5 years, over that 5 years. And then what? What happens after 5 years? So it is a tremendous issue. I know the engineering community has been focusing on that. I know the states of Maine and New Hampshire, I've been at conferences where that's been an item for discussion. But I think it really comes down to having, you have the carrot and the stick. I think you need to have a bit of a stick with BMP maintenance. In other words, if it's not maintained, there's some sort of financial disincentive because it just is not happening. And then having stronger regulations. And again, you could have a really good code enforcement officer in your town. But if there's not good mechanisms, to have continual follow-ups, to continually look at sites, whether it's the road crews or whatever, it's gonna struggle. That's a great question.
Okay, thanks. Okay, this one's for Gary. Does more frequent cleaning of one's septic system affect the speed of infiltration? And if so, can you quantify it?
That's a really difficult question to qualify. The pumping out a septic tank more frequently, what it will do is reduce the amount of suspended solids in biochemical that requires oxygen. So the more frequently you pump out the septic system will reduce the amount of suspended solids that will get into the leach field, which then can clog the bottom of the leach field. Typically on a residential property, once every 2 years is a good pumping schedule to help that. We have done talks where people have said, I don't have any issue with my system and I haven't pumped it out in 50 years. Well, the reason it hasn't pumped out in 50 years is because it's more than likely the system is in the water table, and the best way to clean out a leach field is to have it in the water table, so every spring and fall when the water table comes up, it flushes it out and it sends all those contaminants downstream to your neighbors. So it's a difficult question. has a lot to do with the type of system, the soil, and the number of people in your house and what you're doing as a homeowner and what you're putting down the drain.
Great, thanks. Okay, so this one's for Forrest. How is lake water quality related to property values?
Oh boy, that's a great one. I think Gary had a slide where when you put things in monetary values, people tend to perk up a bit. They can understand that more. There were some really good studies that were done in the 80s, and I think have been repeated a few times since then, showing that with every meter of decline in water clarity, that property values, decrease X amount. I haven't memorized that number, which is probably good because every study I've seen has it a little different, but it's a significant amount. And I guess I can speak to one lake in particular. I helped on quite a while ago, China Lake in Maine, in central Maine, where they had these blooms, like some of the photos I showed you, and property values, plummeted. And, remember that this was in the 90s, property values were much different than they were then, but it was common to see $100,000 decreases, for some of the larger properties. People moved away. In that case, it was a situation of a lot of agricultural issues, and I give credit to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Natural Resources Conservation Service to work with the landowners and put in some pretty sophisticated measures that cleaned up China Lake, and property values are back up, and everyone's happy again. So there's good, but it is a direct correlation. And if you need to ask for funding for your municipality, be sure to remind them what the tax base is. You can do that calculation for the lake you live on, because it's a huge percentage of your towns.
Right, and I think New Hampshire Lakes did a study on just that question. What is what's the value of our lakes, and that'd be well worth taking a look at. Okay, this one's for Gary. Are there systems or solutions that are somewhere in between the individual homeowner solution and municipal, sort of that neighborhood or development scale septic system?
So we have done over the years community systems where they will take a series of lots that are on the road or on a lake, and take 4 or 5, 10 lots and tie them in together and create like a village district type of organization, where then the system, each owner would have a separate septic tank, maybe a pump chamber, and then it would get pumped over to a leach field, a community-based leach field. The problem with that is now you've got 11, 10 homeowners that need to get along with each other and has to get assessments to maintain the septic system. So it can be done. You can go with aerobic treatment systems. There's a lot of them on the market. There's probably 5 or 6 of us right now in New Hampshire, which allows you, as we talked earlier, to take that leach field and reduce it by 90%. So it's easier now in the last 4, 5, 10 years to go with a smaller leach field on a small lot than what we had before. So there's a lot of flexibility. I tend to talk about going away from the community-based type systems and do with individual, because it's easier to maintain. And if you think about if you had 10 homes on one system and the system failed, that's 10 property owners that have an issue that has to be fixed. So it is a bigger impact. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. So we're gonna have Forrest and Gary come back up at the end with the rest of the presenters, but we're gonna move on into sort of the individual reports from kind of the lightning round from each of the individual groups that are working on these issues in Wolfboro. So thanks, Forrest. Thanks, Gary. So the first speaker, and she's the person that's sort of in charge of the broadest area of Wolfboro, as part of her purview, is Pat Tarpey, Executive Director of the Lake Winnipesaukee Association. Julie first. So she's the second largest area. Julie needs no introduction here since you've already heard her speak, but she's been our executive director for how many years? 5 years now. She's really brought the association a long ways and done a lot of good work, and I've been privileged to be able to work with her on a lot of these projects over the years, and very happy to have her around. And she's going to tell us what's going on in Wentworth and Crescent Lake.
Thanks, Don. I wasn't going to change the slide positions for you. So there we go. So thank you so much. We've had such a great morning learning from our two keynote speakers. And so each of us Lake Associations is going to give you an update about what we've been doing for our watershed management planning, et cetera. And I think I get to progress my own slides. Here we go. So the Wentworth Watershed Association has been in existence in lots of different ways over time, combination of different organizations. And so in 2016, we became the Wentworth Watershed Association, and this is our mission. And so water quality is the forefront of everything we do, but we also conserve water quality through land conservation and community education events like this one. So thank you for being here. So since its inception, a group of very focused community members and volunteers started putting together our watershed management plan, which is technically a sub-watershed plan to the Lake Winnipesaukee, which goes to the Merrimack River. You all saw on the maps where you live in the watershed, but our sub-watershed planning process began in 2010. So the first watershed management plan was created and put into print in 2012, and since then, we have gone through 4 phases, and we're now on phase 5. So the first phase was our planning phase, which was the creation of the watershed management plan. Our second phase was Auto Care Plus, Mass Landing and Jeans Beach, which were major BMP installations. The third phase was at Camp Bernadette. The fourth phase was Fern Avenue and Pierce Camp Birchmont, and right now we're in the application phase, or pre-application phase for phase 5, with an intention right now to work on our Kingswood Acres site. So to give you an idea, each of these phases, if it's going well, takes 3 years. So just so you have an understanding of the long-term commitment and the many, many hours of work that have been done. So here's our phase 1 completion, which was mentioned that we're in the process right now of working on updating it because they're really only viable for about 10 years. So some portions of it can be reused, but we have to relook at water quality, what's changed, what kind of land use has changed, what the population is doing, how much more often people are living here, what are the state of the septic systems. When Forrest mentioned the septic systems that was inventoried in 2010, we're now 13 years past that point. So a lot of the septic systems that were functioning at that point are not potentially functioning in the same capacity now, which is my shameless ploy for you to come to our workshop that you can sign up for at our table. So this is kind of the idea of the sub-watersheds, and you can see all the different tributaries that come into the Wentworth watershed area. And this was the preliminary studies that kind of showed you where the solids were coming from, what the issues were in 2010. This is some of the information that will be updated when land use is updated. And these were the goals. These were the very, very optimistic and lofty goals that were established in our watershed management plan. And I will say, now that I've learned a lot about this, very unrealistic goals. I wish that they were real, but even with the amount of work that we have done, we have accomplished maybe 15% of this goal, and that's being potentially generous. It doesn't mean we haven't done work, but it takes, as Don likes to say and Forrest likes to say, I hear you where you get it from now, but it's death by 1,000 cuts. We've made more progress, but not this kind of progress. So just to show some of the work that has been done, the installations, and we do monitor for maintenance of them as well. So we actually have part of our our committee's goals is we walk these properties every year to see if the maintenance is happening. Now, granted, we don't have any say in whether the landowners are doing what they promised to do, but we do have relationships and we can have conversations. So Auto Care Plus was one of the first installations that was done, and then the work that was done at Mass Landing, which, you know, if you visit Mass Landing, it's constantly a work in progress, and in partnership with the town, trying to maintain these projects that are done, especially on town properties. It's not always working perfectly. These engineered designs are engineered designs. They're the best that we can do, but there will be problems and things that need to be fixed. It's my first time with this clicker, I apologize. The Jeans Beach installation that was completed, it wasn't 100% successful. There's certain things that'll have to be modified. And that is part of this, is we have to keep looking at them over and over and over again and saying, how can it be rejockeyed? While we're looking to the future of what's next. So this is what comes back from the engineers after we've done an installation. It kind of gives you an idea of what kind of solids and what amounts of phosphorus are being removed by, or projected to be removed by that system annually. So over time, these installations make a bigger and bigger and bigger impact as you're reducing those solids and that phosphorus loading over time. So phase 3 was our very successful installation at Camp Bernadette. And all of these projects, just to clarify, are partnership. So in order to be able to do these 319 grants, our funding, we partner with the town of Wolfboro, who signs on, and the town planner actually is in charge of the project, which we support. So the town donates that staff time, and they also give matching dollars. Our association donates staff time and matching dollars. And then DES, through the EPA, donates a large quantity of the funds. So it is a real community effort, and without that effort, I don't think we would be even close to successful as the organization has been. Camp Bernadette's installation, you can see the before, and then during the construction, and then these very beautiful now installations that are on the property, bettering the waterfront, but also stopping down the incredible amount of erosion that was coming off of the beach. Phase 4 was our Fern Avenue, which is a smaller installation project for that community beach to infiltrate the water that was coming off of the camp road, and then also stopping the stormwater from overflowing that beach and putting that the sand directly into the water. So this particular project, you can see the numbers are actually quite low of what the impact is for a major project. That project was around $15,000. But over time, this will make a very big difference. And so the bigger the projects, the bigger the impact technically. Coming to our next project, which was the lion's share of a phase 4 project, which was the installation in Pierce Camp, Birchmont's camp, where we perched the beach. As you can see what it's supposed to look like. And so you can see this storm wall here was installed so that it would stop the sand from going directly over this other wall. But the sand flows over this wall, and it's the property owner's responsibility to collect the sand and bring it back up to replenish from the beach instead of it going over the property wall. However, best laid plans. This beach is having a lot of problems. There's a lot of groundwater that's changed with all the storms, and so right now we're meeting with them to go back out, and there may need to be additional engineering to fix the initial engineering. So again, this is not a one and done effort. It is a community effort. And so what will come of it? I don't know yet, but I'll find out more on Tuesday. But this is how these projects work. So other BMPs, you keep hearing this word BMPs. You see the big beach at Camp Pierce Birchmont. However, you also don't see some of the other structures. So some of these simple things, like this water diversion bar that was installed, this actually is a simple solution that can be installed very easily on one of your roads, and not an expensive fix. So there was concrete here, but they cut an area that diverted the water from running down that slope, and so it sends it out and it goes into a water treatment area. It's a very simple BMP. Other things here, there's a deep sump converter. We also put in infiltration steps here coming off the side and diverted water that was coming down this road, and any other water that was remaining is diverted in, and then it goes into these steps. So the beach was a large portion of it, but there were 6 other installations on that property to try to divert the water upstream to stop the sand from flowing. So again, I'm not an engineer. That's why we hire engineers to do this work, and it is a true partnership, but it does make a big impact. So you'll see the numbers that came out from the different portions of the work that was being done at Camp Pierce Birchmont are a lot larger. And a lot of the big impact is really the solid load of that sand that carries phosphorus with it. So each project is unique, each project is worth it, and even the small projects make a difference. So what's next? As of right now, we have coming out of our watershed management planning. From each phase, new concepts come for the sites that are prioritized based on your watershed management plan. Initially, we had 100 sites identified. Between people making changes and us doing changes and the town doing changes and everybody in the community making changes, we've already hit our top 20 sites. So then we have reprioritized with engineers. The Wentworth Watershed Association has funded our own engineering to go back out and look at the sites. We have a new top 20 sites. And the site that we're looking at applying for is the Kingswood Acre site, in conjunction with what's going to happen with the Route 28 corridor. And so we're trying to work with the town to partner to stop some of the water issues that are coming into Crescent Lake. So because we oversee both those water bodies plus Sergeant's Pond, it's really important that we work on Crescent Lake, because Crescent Lake is the outfall into Smith River and therefore going into Wolfboro Bay, which is going to affect what's happening for Lake Winnipesaukee as well. This gives you an idea of what this takes. Over the history of our watershed management planning and actions, we've received over $500,000 in grant funds. It's also had matching funds from the town and the organization. So your membership dollars are being used to pay towards this. Your annual fund dollars even more so. We've partnered with 4 private landowners. We've partnered with the town. We've done installations in both locations. There have been many thousands of hours of work between the employees of the town, the employees of the organization, but most importantly, a group of very dedicated, smart volunteers who are willing to look through the minutia and spend hours inside and outside advocating for lake health. But we barely touched the phosphorus. We have so much work to do, but each of your properties can make a big difference. Last year we talked about camp roads and installation of maintaining your camp roads, how to install camp roads. We had, if you recall, we had Russ Lanoy here talking about them last year. And if you have not seen that talk, I hope that you will watch our Water Summit from last year on our YouTube channel. But additionally, we have put together a Google group for camp road agents, and you don't have to be in the Wentworth Watershed Association to be a part of it, to be able to share your wins and your fails and ways that you've been successful with your camp roads. So if you are an agent or your road association, you know who's in charge of the roads, encourage them to join, because the best way to be effective is to learn from each other. There's no need for you to be reinventing the wheels when it comes to camp road maintenance. We also have resources on our website and in the back. Please, please, please sign up for a Lake Winnie Blue or Lake Smart or Lake-minded property visit to get ideas of what you can do on your property. This is not for people to show up and wag their fingers at you and say you're doing it wrong. Really, we're there to partner with you, come up with ideas and solutions, and in affordable ways to install simple things on your property to infiltrate water. So I really hope you visit our table back there, or our partners tables to sign up for those visits. To give you a very brief update on what's happening with our water quality. The Wentworth Watershed Association has 4 sampling water teams that do in-lakes water sampling that have been sampling pretty much on a weekly basis since 1985 in all of these sites. Our water quality data helps inform what comes out of watershed management planning. We also, for the past 6 years, Don? We've been doing tributary? How many? Before me. The last 20 years, we've been doing tributary sampling as well on the 16 tributaries that come into Lake Wentworth and Crescent Lake. And these are all the sites that are sampled. There's 28 sites because there's multiple sites sampled along tributaries. And there is a group of volunteers, if we need more of you, who, when we get a call from Dom when there's going to be an inch of rain, we all put on our slickers and we go out into the streams, down the stream banks to collect at specific locations to understand what's coming into the watershed from that area. Last year, we sampled, we had over 40 in-lake samples and over 100 samples from our tributary team during the summer of last year. So it is expensive to get those samples processed, but it helps inform us for decision making. We also are continue to tackle all of our aquatic invasive species with our volunteer dive team, our volunteer weed watchers, and our lake hosts. We need lake hosts. Susan, I'm saying it. Please sign up at our table if you are willing to be a volunteer or paid lake host this summer at Mass Landing or another site in Wolfboro. So we hope that you will join us, and more data will be processed on our website. But I want to tell you just a very brief update on what we've learned from our water quality data that just came out from New Hampshire Cooperative Extension. Bob Craycraft, you're here somewhere. Thank you for sending it in. It just came out. So our total phosphorus and chlorophyll, or how green the water is on 2022 is slightly lower than the average for the past 10 years on Lake Wentworth and in Sargent's Pond. Phosphorus was slightly higher in Crescent than average over the past 10 years. Chlorophyll A is about the same. The transparency was better or the same at all the in-lake stations. Stream results were in line with past results. Townsend Brook West, Breezy Brook, and Witten Brook had the highest reported phosphorus concentrations. Stormwater from the Red Brook Circle culverts continues to have a high phosphorus reading. Observations on the ground from the spring of 2023 suggest that quite a bit of sediments associated and associated phosphorus with these big storms are entering the lakes, and large rainfall events in late April have been the same. We've been getting reports of blowouts from lots of people with private beaches, from bigger beaches, from roads. Yes, the storms were big, and they're going to keep getting bigger. So it's time to jump into action now. Get outside when it's raining and look at what's happening on your property. And if you want solutions of ideas of what you could do to make a difference, we have people who are trained and are willing to help for free. So let us know. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Sorry I didn't give you the introduction that you so deserved. Next up is Pat Tarpey, Executive Director of Lake Winnipesaukee Association. Pat leads the LWA mission, which works to protect water quality and natural resources of Lake Winnipesaukee and its watershed. Her geographic area of interest covers nearly all of Wolfboro and all of the towns around Lake Winnipesaukee, as well as those that have land draining to Winnipesaukee. So it's a huge chunk of central New Hampshire is in Pat's universe. So, and I've had the pleasure of working with her for a lot of years, and she's doing great work there. So, Pat, let us know what's up. By the way, if you have questions for any of our speakers, similar to before, write them down on cards and send them forward, and we'll have a time for those a little bit later.
Okay. Now I gotta.
You're taller than me. I'm shrinking as I age. Anyways, welcome everyone. I'm happy to be here and talk to you about the work of the Lake Winnipesaukee Association. My slides in here? Yeah? Okay, thanks. So our mission is the same as every lake association's mission. We're working to protect the water quality of our lake. And we focus on monitoring, education, science, and restoration. So Forrest was talking about how many plans have been done in the Winnipesaukee watershed. So he showed you a map of the Winnipesaukee River watershed. This is just Lake Winnipesaukee's watershed. The green represents where management plans have been completed, and the pink is the area we still have to work on. So 6 plans, there are 10 sub-watersheds in Winnipesaukee. 6 plans have been completed, so we have 4 left to do. Wolfboro Bay is one of them, which we have just started this past January, with funding through the town and through New Hampshire DES. So LWA is the project manager for the Wolfboro Bay Management Plan, and we've hired Forrest Bell and his consulting firm, FB Environmental, to actually do the work. So we've identified 271 sites in the management plans we've been engaged in. It doesn't include the sites for Wentworth, it doesn't include Mirror Lake's plan, and it doesn't include Merry Meeting River's plan that they've done. And that 271 is really underestimated because it only relates to public sites. We can't go on private property. So that's way underestimated of what's actually out there. We have done restoration. Oh, that's another slide. So in addition, we've done at least 1,600 shoreline surveys. So those are more properties on the shoreline, private properties that we can't go on, which are assessed from a boat. So there is a lot of work to be done. And as Forrest mentioned, and Julie, every time you do a management plan, you have a target water quality goal you set with a corresponding phosphorus reduction that you need to meet, and you chip away at it, and you chip away. So where are we at now? I mentioned Wolfboro Bay. That study has been started. We do have EPA funding coming through to complete the rest of those areas of the lake. I'm still in the whole grant paperwork end of things, which will take a little while, but we have $500,000 coming to help make that happen. And as part of that, we will also conduct a lake-wide septic system inventory, a risk analysis, because we know septics are a big deal in the Winnipesaukee watershed. In addition, we have funding right now to do some watershed assessment work in Paugus Bay. Paugus Bay is Laconia's drinking water source. They had a management plan done back in 2010. It was the first one I worked on, and it wasn't as comprehensive as the way we do them now with Forrest's firm. So it definitely needs to be updated. That bottom right photo is Steganema, which Paugus Bay has had happen on their western shore for the last 5 years. And funny, the residents never reported it till last year. They didn't know what it was. It was just sludge, and it was ugly, but people don't know. So hopefully we can address that. As part of this, Langley Cove is also in Paugus Bay, and it's had a tremendous sediment erosion issue. And actually, FB just completed a hydrologic analysis for us, which we're presenting to the city of Laconia this coming week on the results, because it's filled in that cove with sediments, and the people who live there can't even have a boat at their dock by the fall. And so, as you probably know, New Hampshire DES will not consider dredging until you address where the sediment's coming from. So hopefully that will be a future phase. We also started a cyanobacteria monitoring program in Paugus Bay last summer that will be continuing this summer. Again, because it's a drinking water source, New Hampshire DES has money for that stuff. Right now, Source Water Protection has a lot of money. And we're also working with the Laconia Water Department to expand the current water quality monitoring program on Paugus Bay. Lake restoration, so you do the management and then you want to move to implementation, as Julie was talking about. 271 sites identified, that's very low. We've completed 50 projects to date, and that cost, I think between management and restoration, there's probably 1.3 million has been spent so far. We have estimated the reductions in pollutants we've achieved at the 85 pounds of total phosphorus, the 157 of total nitrogen, the sediment, the total suspended solids is a big number. Forrest was talking about dump trucks. That's equivalent to 69 dump trucks, 1-ton dump trucks, annually, removing from the lake. So we do have this map up on our website. So we put these restoration sites up. You can click on them. A picture will pop up along with all the issues with that site and the amount of pollutant reduction that will be achieved if it gets completed. Orange are the sites that need to be done, green's completed, yellow's in the works. So for this year, we do have a New Hampshire DES 319 grant. We are going to be implementing the 3 out of the top 10 sites identified in the Moultonborough Bay plan, which was the last plan completed in 2020. And doing those 3 BMPs will achieve 32% of the pollutant load reduction we're hoping in that watershed. Part of this 319 also has design work for some issues on White Gate Road in Winter Harbor. So that White Gate Road neighborhood flows into Winter Harbor of Winnipesaukee. It's had a lot of water quality issues down there. It had the cyanobacteria bloom in 2018. So this will be the first phase to do some design work to address some of those drainage channel issues and undersized culverts. Water quality monitoring, it's a big part of what we do. This map is also up on our website. And very soon, if you click on one of the dots, you'll get a graph of the last 5 years of total phosphorus, the trends, chlorophyll A, and water clarity. So we've got staff working on that right now. But as you can see, there's a lot of sites. It takes a lot of coordination. It's all done through UNH's Lake Slay Monitoring Program. We're always looking for volunteers. We're always looking for funds for equipment. Equipment is always an issue, and the cost of the lab analysis. But it's been pretty good. It's expanded, and we're always looking to expand and improve where we don't have current monitoring going on. And we talked about cyanobacteria. I do have this cyanobacteria guidance document on the table back there. It's also on our website if you want to print it off. But what we found with working with the towns around the lake, there's 8 towns on Winnipesaukee shorefront. And there's a lot of, who do we report to? If we see something, who do we contact? So this guidance document is just to help. They're not absolute, the pictures, but if you see something in it, looks like one of these, then you know who to call. On the back side, it tells you, call DES first, always DES first, and then it has contacts for, and we have them various for the different towns, like in Moultonborough, who you contact. For Wentworth, Julie's name is listed, etc. But it's been useful for the people. We have seen more observations. We have a cyanobacteria monitoring map where we do document the observations. New Hampshire DES's cyanobacteria map doesn't necessarily document that. They do alerts and advisories, but we like to keep track of where they're being observed, even if it doesn't raise to the elevation of an advisory. Education and outreach is an important part of everything we do. The website, working with individuals, the septic stuff we've put on with Gary, I think 4 probably septic system webinars at least. So Gary does a great job. I highly recommend you attend in June. And just some of the tabling, getting out in the community. It's a big watershed. We're still working to even let people know who we are. We're out there, what we're doing. So we're constantly out in the community trying to raise awareness. And as Julie mentioned, we do our program under Be Winnie Blue and Lake Smart. It's tailored on New Hampshire Lake's Lake Smart program. But just coming out, doing a property visit, assessing your property and giving you some recommendations. And we've increased the number we've been able to do. You see 2020 COVID hit, there weren't any property assessments done, but we did 55 last summer. So it's been well received and people are actually implementing the recommendations, which is great. And that's it. Keep Winnie Blue. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Pat. So we're going to go from really big to one of the smaller but no less important water bodies in town, and that's Russ Pond. Libby Peard is she's a board member, and she's committed to preserving Russ Pond water quality for future generations. She's worked in coordination with DES to complete a comprehensive lake study of Russ Pond in 2007. She serves as a member of the Wilfboro Waters Committee, and after decades as a summer person, Libby feels fortunate to call Wolfboro her year-round home. I think, the importance of Russ Pond is it's the first water body you really see when you come into Wolfboro from the south. It is, and I can't tell you the number of people that have come through town and said, was that Winnipesaukee I saw there? I said, no, but it's a really nice pond, and Libby's going to tell us a little bit about what they have going there.
Good morning. Well, thanks to Don for sort of readjusting expectations as we deal with a very different scale of operation. I was feeling, oh, sorry. I'm so glad that Don helped you adjust your thinking about scale of operation. I was feeling so great about Russ Pond's sampling program, which is 3 times a summer, until I heard Julie talk about every week and, so many different sites and locations. But fair warning, I'm here at my first water summit, and I'm filling in for veterans. Keith Simpson and Art Slocum have done a great job representing us through the years. And I want to thank Julie and the Wentworth Watershed Association for including us at this valuable event. I'm not sure how much anyone knows about Russ Pond, so I'm just going to give you some really quick basic information and then provide some headlines about a recently received 319 grant for work beginning later in the year. First, its name notwithstanding, Russ Pond is actually a lake. It has 15,748 feet of shoreline and is 210 acres in size. Its watershed, by comparison, is 1,651 acres. The two main inlets are Perry Brook, which captures runoff from Copple Crown and the Lake Winnipesaukee Golf Course and all that's in between. And this is the largest watershed area reflected on the map sort of to the lower right side of Russ Pond in red. And then there's the North Inlet, which channels runoff from Kingswood, Brewster Heights, Pleasant Valley Road, a section of Route 28, and Cross Road. And this is the blue oval in the upper left of the slide. The latter inlet is our biggest trouble spot, and I'll go into a little bit of detail about what that involves. Russ Pond's one outlet is a dam on the west side of the lake, which eventually sends water into Lake Winnipesaukee. Russ Pond continues to be considered a healthy or oligotrophic lake, but there have been significant changes in our metrics through the years. We credit Ed Webb, a now deceased but dearly beloved lake resident, with being the first to sign on for among the first to sign on for the volunteer lake assessment program, and his legacy as a really committed group of testers who are out there every summer, and we still feel good about our three opportunities. Russ Pond, like other lakes in the area, has certainly seen an increase in phosphorus and other metrics that are going in the wrong direction through the years, but we're relatively stable compared to changes, I'd say, in other areas. One of the biggest indicators that's changing and is of increasing concern for Russ Pond is our conductivity statistic, which is definitely moving in the wrong direction. However, to this point, we have not seen exotic plant species like milfoil in our lake, and we so far have not experienced a toxic cyanobacteria bloom. There's definitely been increasing algae and plant growth through the years and changes in the bottom of our lake, which I assume many others have experienced. So the biggest change to Russ Pond through the years has occurred at the north end, where we've seen excessive sediment loading completely redefine the landscape. This slide is taken from roughly the same place at the North Inlet and shows the progression in loading from 1998 to 2010, and it didn't stop in 2010. A sizable landmass at the Delta has redefined the lake experience for immediate area residents, but the tremendous sediment deposit has had implications for all residents as it's impaired water quality. The primary causes are sediment loads from upstream land clearing and development, related hydro modification, and the resulting channel erosion due to much higher storm water runoff. We had a study conducted in 2012, quite a name, the Russ Pond North Inlet and Route 28 Boat Ramp Sub-Watershed Assessment, that recommended many important steps for reducing sediment loading at the north end. As part of this grant-funded project, a severely eroded section of stream bank at the North Inlet was shored up in 2013, including removal of a beaver dam that was contributing to instability and bank erosion. The project was estimated to reduce sediment loading by just under half a ton a year, and I guess the headline is that there were so many other steps that were recommended to improve conditions, and much more work to be done. Even our small lake has a lot of areas that need attention in order for us to make sure we're setting the stage for forward progress in the right directions. A recent study in 2021, the Russ Pond North Inlet tributary hydrology evaluation, made several recommendations for some of this additional work. And with help and advocacy from town officials, Russ Pond recently received a 319 grant along with some town matching funds to move forward on some of this work. There are three main elements of the next phase project, and work is scheduled to begin in the fall, and we hope will be completed by November of next year. So main project elements include construction of additional best management practices, BMPs, to reduce sediment loading in the north end. BMPs include drainage channel improvements, sediment traps, and beaver dam flow-through pipes. In addition, the town will also develop a public education or outreach program to inform property owners about the benefits of vegetated stream buffers and suggested plannings for improved buffering. From today's summit, I realize there's so many other things we need to include in that public education outreach program. And then the last element is a feasibility study to determine the costs and feasibility of dredging to restore conditions at the north end impaired by sediment deposition. Obviously, this is a necessary step to inform permitting and design and logistical considerations as we try to advance that project. So we feel really fortunate that we've been able to make some progress in addressing North End issues, but as I said, there's always so much more work to be done for all of us who are interested in preserving the water quality of New Hampshire lakes. A next priority for Russ Pond is better management of concerning runoff coming off 28 a little bit farther south of Crossroads, and we hope to be able to provide some kind of an update next year about ways in which we're moving forward on that. So I think those are the highlights. Smaller lakes should get a whole lot less time. So if you have questions, I'll be at the back after the event. So thank you. Yes.
Thanks, Libby. So I think one thing that her synopsis kind of brought home is that even though there's a lot of big stuff happening around the state, all the work's getting done in small areas, in neighborhoods, on specific roads, specific projects. You know, these are local things that we're doing, and those are the things that are driving water quality for the most part. So we're going to go from one end of town to the other. We're going to go up to Mirror Lake. Kathy Sharapa is the president of the Mirror Lake Association. She's been on Mirror Lake since '79. She's an avid environmentalist, and I can attest to that. I've sat in a number of meetings with her, and she's happy to volunteer her time supporting the work of the Mirror Lake Protective Association. And they've done a lot of work and really good stuff. So I'm happy to hear from her.
Thank you, Don. Yeah. Don, you use Okay, there we go. So first of all, I want to thank everybody for coming out today, because this is really where all the work is really being done, all the people in the seats. But I want to thank Julie and the Lake Wentworth Association and the speakers that this has been a very enlightening evening or morning. So we try to keep our message very simple on the Mirror Lake Protective Association. And all we're really working towards is clean water and land conservation. So it's just very easy to remember what it is we're doing. Here's a little bit about Mirror Lake. Our shorelines go across almost 50-50 between Tuftonboro and Wolfboro. There's 103 shoreline properties. It's not that easy to figure out which Mirror Lake you're talking about, because there's 129 of them in the world. 109 of them are in the United States, 19 are in Canada, and 1 is in New Zealand. So even recently I wanted to find out what fish we have exactly in Mirror Lake, and the guy at the State Department said, which one? So I had to describe where we were. Our lake is a little bit bigger than Russ Pond, 333 acres. We're 509 feet above sea level, and with Winnipesaukee being 504, we obviously flow into that lake. But we are very lucky, because the tallest mountain on the Ossipee Mountain range is Mount Shaw, 2,990 feet, and it reflects beautifully on Mirror Lake. So we're really proud of that. So we have a strategic plan, and here's how we set it up. I became the president about a year ago, and I interviewed a lot of people in the room. I interviewed the key people of the major lakes around our area, and then the key people in the town of Wolfboro and Tuftonboro, just to find out what we should be doing. And I've attended the Wolfboro Water Summit since its inception, but I also go to the Lakes Congress, which this year is June 2nd. And that's a tremendous learning opportunity in a beautiful setting over at Church Landing in Meredith. So if you have a chance to go to that, that's a fantastic experience. We did, and thanks to Dusty Davies, who's here this morning, we started our plan. Geocentech put it together for us. It's about 150 pages or so. And so we've been working on that for all those years. And we had basically 10 to 12 initiatives. We've completed all of them, with the exception of we have not yet put together any community septic systems. We found, and I thought it was interesting, Gary mentioned that it's very difficult to get property owners to join together to do joint systems. And it sounded like he's thinking of going in a different direction for that, and I can understand why. Bob Hartzell was the person we worked with, and we did some excellent work, but I think it was mentioned this morning about you have to maintain all the work, and I'm not sure we've been as good about that. So next time around, we'd probably be much more aggressive about exactly how is the maintenance work going to happen. And we have recently done a rapid ecological assessment with Rick Vanderpoel, and what he did for us is basically the unoccupied land on Mirror Lake. He studied it all and identified 6 properties that would be a great advantage to put in land conservation and prioritize them. So we're gradually working on all of that. And of course, we use, like all of you do, the UNH and New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services have been very helpful in our water testing. So one of the things that happened is I think we're pretty successful with our aquatic plant monitoring, which Norma Milne does with a team. And I want to thank the town of Wolfboro, because when they put in the new docks, I noticed they had that sign painted right on the pavement. I thought that was great, and I wanted to see if we could use their little stencil, and they let us do that, which was great. So now if you use the 109 boat launch, which is the only public way to enter the lake, that's the first thing that you see. Our weed watching group has been very successful. We don't have any milfoil yet, and the only thing that we have found of an exotic species, and we know how to get rid of it, is is it lupine, the purple one? That's it, purple loosestrife. So what we found when we got the Geocentech report, they listed, and we had a little booklet of all the exotic plants in New Hampshire that you look out for. But we also had all the natural plants from Mirror Lake. So our Weed Watchers team went right to work. But we kept finding things that weren't in the book, and so we'd send it to the state and have it tested, and they'd say, no, that's native to New Hampshire, that's native, that's native, that's native. So our team was so good that we found lots and lots of native plants that weren't listed in the original booklet. So we redid the booklet in 2019, so we have a pretty good idea of what's natural to Mirror Lake right now. So we've had 4 cyanobacteria outbreaks since 2008. And one thing we probably didn't pay enough attention to, and I liked how Forrest was talking about it's an evolving field. We didn't really understand the second column there about the dominant taxa, but now we're understanding that it depends, the particular outbreak that you have, you need to really understand that, because that has a lot of meaning. So going forward, we're going to be much clearer about exactly what's going on with that particular outbreak. So we've been working on it, and I'm very impressed with how some of the other presenters know exactly the load that's been relieved by the mitigating decisions that you've made. And we have that information, but I don't think we use it in quite the same way. So this has been good for me to learn about that this morning. This may be hard to find, but if you look at the blue line on the bottom, that's our basic phosphorus loading. And so we have a downward trend. The other lines, the big green one, those are our inlets. And one of the things I'm impressed that Julie was talking about, they already go out with their rain gear, because we have recently learned that we need to get out there and sample the inlets during storms so we can really see what's going on. Overall, we have an average shallow lake, and overall it's about 12 feet deep. However, we have a deep spot which is 43 feet, and we have great suspicions that our phosphorus load is coming from there, and that's a big issue for us. So we've done a lot of study of that, and so our red line there, which is going down, is the deep spot. So we're keeping an eye on all of this. One of the ways we are keeping an eye on this, we use Val Zanchek as our vice president, and he has a software program called Tableau. And I'm very happy to see Bob Craycraft was here, and Don came to our meeting, and we had Lake Winnipesaukee actually came. That was Bree Rossiter came, and then a few of our members came, just to study a little bit more deeply what's going on and what does it all mean. So in terms of what does it all mean, after that meeting, which we just had a few weeks ago, here's what we're going to do. We're going to sample the tributaries during rain and other storm events. There's so much good information in our initial geocentric water management plan that we can still use a lot of it. So rather than scratch it and start again, we're going to do an addendum to that plan. We need to make better use of an oxygen meter, and UNH has made that available, and there are oxygen meters around. We haven't paid enough attention to that. So we've been using it, but we don't use it, the data. So we're going to get on that. We're trying to educate everybody about the best management practices, and I personally had a Lake Smart, went through that process, took the survey, had people come out, assess my property. They made a couple of suggestions. My husband and I enacted them. It was pretty simple stuff. They were excellent people. They'd make you feel great about your property. So I want to promote that a little bit more and see if we can get more people to go through that process, because all of this is really in the hands of the individual property owners, and without their help, all this is lost. So the Lake Smart I really enjoyed. We've learned that we need to do more with core sampling. In fact, we need to just do core sampling. It's a costly move, but in order for us to understand our particular phosphorus and how it interacts with the other elements in our lake, core sampling has to be done. So that's a $5,000 to $10,000 process, but we'll learn so much from that. So that's part of our initiatives too. I already mentioned about our land conservation efforts, and one big success that we have different tributaries that come in, but we only have one outlet which goes into Lake Winnipesaukee, and we now have the land that's around that outlet is in conservation, and a local landowner helped us with that, so that's been great. As an organization, all of this works together. You have to have good membership in your organization, and you have to pay attention to your finances, because otherwise you'll never control environmentally what's going on. So this year we're going to work a lot harder on that. And of course, we would like some of the grants to help us with our initiatives, and so we have to figure out what's the right path for us and who are the right people to help us out. So that's Mirror Lake.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. So from sort of the north end of town, we're going to go shift gears a little bit and go to sort of the organization that's responsible for sort of all of the waters in Wolfboro, and that's the Wolfboro Waters Committee. It's a committee of the town, and Abby Adams is going to talk to us about what they have going on there. Dr. Adams is a retired physician who fell in love with the Lakes region 40 years ago. She became involved with Wolfboro Waters in 2018. She's committed to using her science background and her energy to work to keep our lakes clean. And she'll tell us a little bit about the sort of what they have going on. Yeah.
This is low enough?
Yeah.
So, hi, I'm Abby Adams, and I chair the.
You have to get fairly close to them.
Am I really? Are you hearing me? Good. All right. Got to practice. I chair the subcommittee communications for Wolfboro Waters. And first of all, I do want to thank everybody at Wentworth Watershed for not only putting together this great event, but having an opportunity for all of us to speak. They really are the leaders of the pack when it comes to conservation and watershed education. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Wolfboro Waters Committee. We came into being in 2018 after the first cyanobacteria outbreak on Lake Winnipesaukee in Winter Harbor. I think everybody thought the big lake would be clean forever, and clearly that was not the case. Wolfboro Waters was formed as a town committee, and we report to the Board of Selectmen. We're appointed by the Board of Selectmen. And we were formed to address concerns over the water quality of all the lakes and ponds in Wolfboro, because they're just such an important resource for the town and the surrounding communities. Wolfboro Waters has 3 working subcommittees, and I'd like to just take a minute and tell you about their focus and the work they're doing. The assessment subcommittee has a special focus on cyanobacteria as an emerging concern. They've been taking observations, collecting both water and sediment samples that complement the UNH Lake Lakes Monitoring Program and the New Hampshire DES Voluntary Lakes Monitoring Program. And they also work with all the other lake associations in their sampling. These efforts have included acquiring a fluorometer, which can do on-site measurements that distinguish between green algae and cyanobacteria. We've worked with local labs trying to determine actually what are the most common cyanobacteria present in our lakes and ponds. And in addition to that, we are training our volunteers to do a PCR analysis to determine precisely which cyanobacteria is present in a water sample, and that can be done in a 2-hour window, which would be a great improvement. All of these resources are available to all the lake associations as needed. Our second committee is the Mitigation and Prevention Committee, and they take the lead in addressing emerging water quality issues and identifying which community resources could address those. They are in work directly with the town boards, the town committees, the town departments, and have helped formulate and implement regulations that affect water quality. Specifically mitigation of stormwater runoff and shorefront zoning regulations. And the third subcommittee, the working committee, is communications. And our charge is really to communicate what we are doing and also try to educate folks in the watershed about what to do and not to do to keep our water quality at its best. We do send out a quarterly e-newsletter, as well as maintain a website for Wolfboro Waters on the town website, and we have a Facebook page. And we submit monthly articles to the Granite State News. So in closing, Wolfboro Waters is a town committee appointed by the Board of Selectmen, whose mission really is to advocate for water quality and to collaborate with all the lake associations. And please stop by our table and pick up a free bumper sticker. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Abby. So now we're going to have all the speakers come back up, and we'll go through a few more questions. If people have more questions, now's the time to send them forward. and we'll see if we can get through them.
We're in the home stretch. 15 minutes. Bring on the good questions.
Right. We have all the hard questions that I saved till the end here. Yeah, no, that's fine with me.
I gave you a chair too, so you can sit down and show.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Okay.
I'll stand in the corner.
Kind of like you have this. There we go. More questions.
Oh, good. Okay.
Oh, the battery's on.
Okay. I think we have enough questions here to fill 15 minutes, maybe more. This first one, since Julie has the microphone, I'm going to go with her first. Huh. Okay, Julie.
Okay. Hello.
Yeah. Can you educate us about the rules of the lake? And I think we're talking about Lake Wentworth Crescent Lake regarding, one, types of boats that can be on our lake. Can anyone put any kind of dock, or are there some permits that need to be applied for? Same thing with moorings in Lake Wentworth. And what kind of oversight and enforcement is done to protect the lake from owners' boats, docks, and moorings?
That is a loaded question. Thank you so
told you they
much,
weren't gonna be
audience
easy.
members. So there is no actual mooring law on Lake Wentworth. It is not a water quality issue, so it's not something that the Wentworth Watershed Association is addressing. However, it is something as community members that you could work together towards to talk to the state to install one. That is not something I'm taking up from the association's perspective. Second of all, the watercraft. It's a small water body. The combination of them, it's bigger than to the two other smaller lakes, but it is not a humongous lake. We hope that you use small motorized or self-powered vessels. There was a no jet ski, or it was called something else before, regulation put in the 80s, but it's never really been regulated to the way it should be. So I don't really know what the status is of that law, and I would really advise that you contact Marine Patrol, because the more calls that come into Marine Patrol is the more often that Marine Patrol will be patrolling our water body. So that whenever anybody calls in with complaints about what's happening on the water, I refer them to making the phone call themselves to Marine Patrol. And then as far as dock regulations go, there are very clear dock regulations on DES webpage, and we also have information about best practices with docks and what you should and shouldn't use for materials for water quality. That's it.
Okay. All right, this one's going to be a combination. You guys can tag team on it. Forrest and Pat. Other than detergents, soaps, etc., where does phosphorus come from?
Well, I guess I will first, go back to my slide from the slide presentation that had all the sediment and all the eroding roads and ditches. So phosphorus is naturally within our soil. So it's part of, there's a whole phosphorus cycle. There's phosphorus within us. So phosphorus is everywhere. But I like to talk about the soil part of it because the volume is so high of soil that goes into our streams and into our lakes. There's obviously phosphorus in fertilizers as well, so NPK, and there's been some fairly substantial movement towards non-phosphorus fertilizers, which I think has gone pretty well, even working directly with Scott and some of the other companies that have their fertilizers, their producers of it. So again, you don't need a lot of phosphorus in your soil here in New Hampshire. To start a lawn sometimes, yes, but to keep putting it on, it's usually pretty unnecessary. There's a golf course in Augusta, Maine that doesn't use any phosphorus, and it's green and lush, and everything's working fine. So I probably, anything more? Oh, yeah.
All right, good. You left me a couple. Septics, I think in the management plans that we've done, though, at least for Winnipesaukee, the septics might be 10% of the total load. It's really more the whole watershed load coming off, surface runoff, stormwater runoff. And then atmosphere. Rainfall makes up a chunk. And on Winnipesaukee, when you're out in the Broads, that actually can be a big chunk. But anyways, those are the main.
Right. I mean, I think the bottom line is that phosphorus is attached to soil particles, and any place there's soil particles coming in, either through the atmosphere, through dust, or through runoff or erosion, phosphorus comes along with it. Okay. Next, for Gary. You talked about the amount of grease now showing up in septic systems. Just curious, how do you know that, and who collects data on this, and how?
So for our company, we monitor around 2,500 septic systems in New Hampshire, residential and commercial. So we do constant testings throughout the year. We probably do somewhere around 300 to 400 water samples from various systems. So we have seen the increase ourselves from our own work that we've done with testing, that there's been an increase. In comparison to, say, a coffee shop or a restaurant, we're now seeing, in some cases, we're seeing oil and grease at the same levels that you would see in a commercial application.
Okay. Okay, here's a pretty specific one, and may not have the answer, but we'll try it anyway. This is for Abby, I think. But if anyone else has any more information, that'd be great. Along Back Bay, there was once a landfill area, or a dump. It's long since retired. Has there been any monitoring or studies done of potential chemicals from that area leaching into the water?
To my knowledge, no studies have been done other than phosphorus, and that is higher in Back Bay than it is in other parts of the Wolfboro Bay. Yes, I mean, I think we all know, those of us who look at the history know that there used to be a front bay and a back bay, and front bay is where the Harvest Market is situated, and that was the town dump. So there could very well be stuff there.
Mm-hmm. Right. Fair enough. That it's I guess an open question at this point. So Pat, you mentioned DES doesn't allow dredging unless the sediment source has been identified and dealt with. We periodically review DES permit applications that request dredging boathouses, which DES approves. Is this true? Is this just true for municipalities, but not for private landowners then?
Yeah, good question. I don't have a good answer. I wonder why the boathouses are permitted myself.
I think part of it may be a loophole in the regulations.
Yeah. Just even doing the boathouse expands, the water footprint. So there's all these shoreland restrictions, but I don't understand that one myself. Sorry.
Right. Me either. Okay. So this is more of a comment on education, and this person is very much in favor of that. And it says, one thought is to approach fertilized pesticide suppliers like local ag and hardware and gently educate them as well, or ask that brochures could be displayed in that area to guide consumers. Possibly real estate agents as well, town tax bill mailings, water gear, toy stores, that kind of thing. I.e., your lake may be damaged if we don't take care of it. I think everyone just nod your head if you agree with that.
Yeah, I can speak to it a little bit. Last summer, we developed a phosphorus rack card with fertilizers, and we went to all the hardware stores, even tried Lowe's, the larger ones, and asked them if we could put those out. Most of them agreed. The Lowe's won't do it, the Home Depots, the bigger box stores. But so we were trying to educate them on that and get the word out there.
Okay, this one's for Forrest or me, I guess. It's clear phosphorus is a large driver of cyanobacteria harmful algal blooms in our lakes. Is nitrogen at all a contributing factor or a concern as an element present in runoff in our lakes?
Sure, I'll tee that up, Don, and then you can get your driver out and whack it down the fairway. So the short answer is yes. I mean, when we look at nutrients in lakes, we look at nitrogen levels and phosphorus, and in particular nitrogen-phosphorus ratios to see what the balance is in the lake. So I guess it's interesting. We don't talk much about nitrogen,
right?
But it's because phosphorus is such a high-level issue. So when we look at nitrogen, it's more at what's that balance, and then whatever you have to add.
So I think that's kind of the general guidance, or the literature would tell you that in freshwater, phosphorus is almost always, not always, but almost always the limiting nutrient. So that's the one that determines how much algae you have. In saltwater, you hear a different message, because in saltwater, it's typically nitrogen. So down in the coastal communities, they'll be talking about nitrogen, and many of you may live in coastal communities as your primary or another home. And they typically talk about nitrogen. In addition to it being the most important nutrient in lakes, it's also one of the more easy to control in terms of capture and designing things to control it. And part of that is that it likes to be attached to soil particles. So if you can infiltrate water that has phosphorus in it, it'll attach to the soil particles and not move any further. So it's a little easier to deal with. Nitrogen remains in the water and flows through the groundwater to reappear downstream somewhere. A lot harder to deal with. So we're fortunate in the fact that we have ways of dealing with phosphorus. The unfortunate part is only a little bit of phosphorus goes a very, very long way. So we need to keep track of all of it in order to keep our lakes blue.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I didn't say this in my presentation, and shame on me, but I always like to remind people that we measure phosphorus in parts per billion. So that really kind of helps you picture so 1 part, per billion parts of water. So think about how small that is, and remember some of the levels we're looking at, between 5 and 15 and 20 parts per billion, or what we want in our levels. So I think that kind of helps wrap our head around just exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. And, obviously the combination of nitrogen and phosphorus are it may be 1 + 1 = 1.1 or something, or 1.2. Nitrogen does add to the story, and that's important as well. And that's why I think that the general guidance, at least around lakes, is if you have to use fertilizer without phosphorus. But if you don't have to use fertilizer, don't use it at all.
You can test your soil.
Right. That's right. Go ahead, Julie.
Well, I was going to say maybe one last question and then a push to send people to sign up for things, because we are at that time.
Yeah, so I think we're good. Yeah, I think Julie's point there was have your soil tested before you get that, buy the bag of fertilizer. Okay, so now I'd encourage you to go and go to the various tables, get some more refreshments. I'm going to run down the list of sponsors here, because without them this wouldn't have happened. I think they've been very supportive of these efforts, and we should support them. So this includes the Wolfboro Fund, Wolfboro Waters Committee, Ann Blodgett and Phil Holberton, Linda and Rick Krodoff, Baldwin Excavation, DF Richard Energy, Folsom Design Group, Governor's Landing Association, Joan and Ray Green, Lake Winnipesaukee Association, Melvin Village Marina, Mirror Lake Protective Association, Morgan Stanley, New Hampshire Boat Museum, the Rust Pond Association, Southpaw Yacht Sales, New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, and the town of Wolfboro. So they all deserve a round of applause for supporting this event. I also want to acknowledge all the volunteers we have manning the tables. Our man in the sky up there, Axel, he can wave at us, who's televising this, and the volunteers doing check-in. There was a lot of work that happened before this ever happened today, and they all deserve a big round of applause as well.
So the follow-up workshop with Gary is going to be on June 14th. It's a Wednesday from 9 to noon at the Wentworth Watershed Association office. It's going to be more of a workshop, not a talking head. So we hope that you will join us for that. So you can sign up to get more information. And if you are not on the Wentworth Watershed Association's newsletter, you can also give us your information and we'll blast it out again. But please do sign up. And also a shameless ploy, I'm hosting a bird walk next Sunday. So you should come. And I thank you all for being here. Thank you, Don, and thank you. Both Forrest and Gary volunteered their time today. They are not paid to come here. They care about our community. So thank you both.
Great, and thanks to all the speakers, and it's a wrap.
Yep, thank you.